What if a simple request for leftover food could expose everything wrong with the system? When CEO Cassandra James quietly followed her 26-year-old employee Elena Brooks home, she expected a budgeting issue. What she discovered was a mattress on the floor, skipped meals, and a life built on silent sacrifice. In a country where over 12% of households face food insecurity, this wasn't charity, it was survival. And it forced Cassandra to answer a question too many leaders ignore. Are we really seeing the people who work for us? Cassandra James had reviewed hundreds of employee memos in her decade as the CEO of Midline Kitchens, a fast casual food chain spread across the Midwest. Most requests were routine, shift swaps, overtime approvals, or time off forms. But this one stood out. It wasn't bold. It wasn't even long. Just a single typed sentence tucked at the bottom of a feedback form. Would it be possible to take home any leftover meals after closing shift? There was no complaint, no urgency, just quiet hope. The name attached, Elena Brooks, 26 years old, a line cook at one of the older locations in Toledo, Ohio. On paper, nothing unusual. Full-time, consistently present, zero formal write-ups. Cassandra might have skipped past it had it not been for that strange stillness the sentence left behind. It wasn't the request itself. Leftovers were often tossed or quietly taken. It was the tone, the restraint, as if asking for extra food after a 12-hour shift required careful permission. As if asking too directly might threaten something. Cassandra didn't know what she was looking for, but that night, just before 11 p.m., she found herself in her car outside the back lot of store number 42, the same store where Elena had clocked in 6 days a week for almost a year. Cassandra sat behind the wheel of her Lexus hybrid, watching through the fogging windshield as Elena, apron off, hair tied back, walked briskly down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. She carried a torn canvas backpack and a brown paper bag. What compelled Cassandra to follow her that night wasn't sympathy. It was dissonance. How could someone work full-time and still need to formally ask for leftover food? That question would unravel more than Cassandra expected. What she would see over the next hour, the distance Elena traveled, the home she returned to, the people she cared for, would break the illusion of corporate success Cassandra had clung to for years. It would reveal not just poverty, but a quiet, systematic cruelty. It would force Cassandra to confront a question more painful than the first. How many Elenas had she overlooked? And what would it take, not just for her, but for her entire company, to actually change something? Cassandra kept her headlights dim as she eased into traffic behind the city bus. Elena had boarded without hesitation, sliding into a seat near the middle, her backpack nestled beside her. The brown paper bag, likely filled with leftovers, sat on her lap. Cassandra had never taken the bus in her life. Her world was filled with Uber rides and chauffeurs, airport lounges, and company cars. Following that bus through dark, uneven streets felt like crossing into another version of the same city, one she had never been asked to see. Stop after stop, the bus emptied, but Elena remained. Cassandra stayed 2 cars back, slowing just enough to avoid suspicion. She was watching a woman who worked beneath her, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a boss. She felt like a stranger trespassing on something real. It was nearly midnight when Elena finally rang the signal cord and stepped off. Cassandra pulled into a side street as Elena walked with quiet determination, past shuttered laundromats, crumbling sidewalks, broken porch lights flickering like dying fireflies. Then Cassandra saw it. A rusted trailer sat at the edge of a gravel lot. It wasn't just old, it looked temporary, like something meant to be moved years ago, but never was. Peeling paint, a sagging front step, a single porch light swaying from its cord. Elena walked up, unlocked the door with a practiced flick, and disappeared inside. Cassandra parked a half block away, heart tight. What she expected to find, she wasn't sure. But this? A full-time employee sleeping in a space smaller than her walk-in closet? A dim light flickered on inside. The curtains were thin, but not opaque. Cassandra leaned forward. Inside, 3 small figures stirred from behind a partition. 2 boys and a girl, none older than 10. They rushed toward Elena the moment she stepped in, wrapping their arms around her waist. She smiled, kneeling to hug them close, exhaustion slipping briefly into joy. Then came a fourth figure, a woman, older, frail. Her gray hair was tied into a bun. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Elena supported her gently by the elbow and guided her toward a chair. Cassandra froze. These weren't Elena's children. Not likely. She was only 26. Siblings, maybe? And the woman, her grandmother? The space inside the trailer was tight. There was no dining table, just a counter with two chip stools. A mattress was rolled up against the wall near the kitchen. No central heat. One small space heater hummed faintly. Elena unpacked the food with care. Cassandra watched as she split the meal 4 ways, then stepped back and didn't serve herself. The kids devoured the food. The older woman ate slowly. Elena sat at the edge of the room, fork in hand, cutting small pieces on a plate she never lifted to her mouth. She was pretending. Cassandra's stomach turned. This wasn't a one-night choice. This was habit. Elena wasn't just hungry, she was living in deprivation, so others didn't have to. And she was doing it silently. According to Grok's psychological framework, these small, nearly invisible sacrifices are hallmarks of marginalized stress response. Chronic self-denial, fear of judgment, the guilt of needing help, the shame of poverty layered with the weight of racialized assumptions, lazy, undeserving, burdensome. That was the toll this life demanded of her. Cassandra leaned back in the driver's seat, her throat dry. How had she missed this? Midline Kitchens prided itself on being family first. It celebrated Employee of the Month, offered bonuses during the holidays, gave away unused food to charities every quarter. But what was that really worth if someone like Elena, punctual, diligent, loyal, was sleeping on a floor and pretending to eat so her family wouldn't worry? Outside the trailer, the wind picked up. A streetlight buzzed overhead. Inside, Elena rubbed her eyes while the children chattered softly around her. They were warm now, federal, settling down. Cassandra saw the oldest boy ask something. Elena paused. Then she smiled, nodded. Cassandra didn't hear the words, but she understood the exchange. He had asked if she ate at work today, and she had lied. The kind of lie rooted not in deceit, but in protection. The kind of lie told by people who carry too much. According to recent BLS data from Gemini, the average real wage for low-income workers has barely increased relative to the inflation that's driven up food and housing costs. While nominal wages may have gone up slightly, the reality is that paychecks stretch thinner than ever. In Toledo, the average cost of a modest two-bedroom apartment is over $950 per month. A line cook at Elena's location made just under $15 an hour. Even working 45 hours a week, she cleared barely $2,400 a month before taxes. After rent, utilities, transit, and groceries, that margin collapses. And yet, she was raising 3 children in a trailer, whether they were her siblings or cousins or unofficial dependents. Cassandra couldn't know. What she could see was that the safety net wasn't catching her. Elena's missing emergency contacts on her HR file now made a tragic kind of sense. She wasn't unreachable. She had no one else. No one she could list. From a cultural lens, as Grok had explained, there's a deeper layer here too. In many communities, especially among Black, Hispanic, and immigrant families, there exists a strong ethic of collective responsibility. Eldest daughters become second mothers. Sacrifice is a sign of strength, not failure. But that strength gets twisted when it's exploited by a system that gives nothing back. Cassandra's company wasn't malicious, but it was blind. They offered gym discounts and mental health hotlines, but not $1 went toward housing support. Not one leftover meal was earmarked for employees. They bragged about food waste reduction, but in the kitchen, most of it still got trashed. What she saw now was a human contradiction, a corporate brand preaching abundance, built on silent suffering. Cassandra stared through the glass. Elena stood now at the sink, washing the few dishes they had. The oldest child curled up under a blanket on the mattress. The others shared a couch. The grandmother slipped into what looked like a recliner padded with towels. Elena wiped down the counter, turned off the light, and lay down on a sleeping pad that looked no thicker than a folded beach towel. This was not an accident. This was not a temporary setback. This was structural. Gemini's housing data had shown a rising trend in eviction filings nationwide. Many jurisdictions had already surpassed pre-pandemic levels. Yet national affordable housing programs remained underfunded, and zoning restrictions prevented new developments in lower-income neighborhoods. Elena's trailer wasn't a choice. It was a forced compromise. Cassandra swallowed hard. Her eyes stung, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. She was angry. Angry at herself, at her company, at the comforting lie she had lived in, believing good intentions were enough. Elena didn't need good intentions. She needed change. Cassandra reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contact list until she landed on the name Jason Hunt, VP of Operations. It was 12:41 a.m. She didn't hesitate. He picked up after 2 rings. Groggy. Cassandra spoke with quiet certainty. "We've failed someone, Jason, and probably not just one person. We fix this tomorrow. Not with memos, with real changes." Jason didn't respond right away. Cassandra didn't wait. She hung up. Because this wasn't about permission, it was about action. Cassandra James sat motionless in her car, the engine still off, the air now cool around her. She wasn't sure how long she had been watching. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. Inside that rusted trailer, the lights had gone out. Silence had returned to the street, but Cassandra's mind was wide awake. This wasn't just about Elena. It was about everyone like her. Every quiet employee who never asked for more. Every shift worker who smiled through exhaustion. Every mother, sister, or aunt who held up the weight of their families on the strength of a paycheck that barely stretched through Friday. Grok's analysis rang in Cassandra's ears. This wasn't just hunger. It was chronic stress, psychological compression, the daily grinding fear of not having enough. Money, time, food, rest. People like Elena lived in constant threat mode, cortisol levels elevated, immune systems depleted, sleep interrupted. It wasn't sustainable. It wasn't humane. And the worst part, Cassandra had thought she was doing everything right. She reviewed quarterly reports, hosted appreciation lunches, opened town halls where employees could submit anonymous feedback, but no spreadsheet had shown her the thin mattress on Elena's kitchen floor. No leadership retreat had prepared her for the image of a child asking if his sister had eaten and watching her lie. This was the moment, Perplexity's emotional pacing would say, where the arc of the story bends. The hero, flawed but well-meaning, sees the truth. The contrast between Elena's dim trailer and Cassandra's climate-controlled SUV lands hard, and something shifts. Cassandra didn't cry. Instead, she made a list in her head. She thought about the cost of the company's last marketing campaign. $86,000 for social ads, influencers, and glossy video spots. What if that had gone toward food security for employees? She thought about the executive perks, travel stipends, fitness reimbursements, boutique hotel retreats. What if those funds helped working mothers afford rent? She thought about the Gemini housing data she had skimmed, but never really absorbed. 1 in 4 renters in Ohio spent more than half their income on housing. Eviction rates were rising. Affordable housing was nearly impossible to find without a wait list. Elena's story wasn't an exception. It was a symptom. And Cassandra? She had been part of the cause. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She titled the first entry, Immediate Action. Line 1, no more food waste. Any leftovers from the kitchens would be boxed and labeled for employees first. Not just allowed, encouraged. Line 2, wage floor review. Full-time employees should not be under the local living wage. Cassandra remembered seeing the latest numbers from the MIT living wage calculator. For Toledo, the bare minimum for a single adult with dependents was around $24 per hour. Elena made barely over $15. That gap wasn't just math, it was survival. Line 3, emergency aid fund, not a loan, a real, accessible pool of money for employees who needed help, with rent, with transportation, with food, no judgment, no bureaucracy, just trust. She would call it the Dignity Fund, because that's what had been stolen from Elena and others like her. Line 4, mental health support, real counselors, not just pamphlets, a partnership with providers trained in trauma, discrimination, poverty-related stress. and sessions during work hours without penalty or stigma. She knew what the board would say: budget constraints, precedent, liability. She didn't care. These weren't just moral choices anymore. They were business decisions, because if her company failed to support its own people, then it didn't deserve to call itself Family First. And eventually that failure would cost more than any program ever could. Perplexity's data on virality showed something else too. Redemption arcs worked, but only when followed by visible, sustained action. Audiences didn't just want to cry, they wanted to see change. They wanted to believe people in power could do something real. Cassandra made another list: what not to do. No performative PR, no public apology unless it included transparency, no cherry-picking success stories while ignoring broader inequities. She would start with a closed-door leadership meeting. She'd bring in outside voices, policy experts, social workers, maybe even someone from the local food bank. She remembered reading a stat from Feeding America just last month. More than 49 million Americans relied on food assistance in 2023, with numbers in 2024 tracking even higher due to inflation and the expiration of COVID-era supports. Those weren't strangers. Some of them worked at midline kitchens. She thought of Elena's formal request, typed, submitted, saved to an employee portal that few ever looked at. That wasn't just caution, that was learned behavior, a sign that she didn't trust the system to hear her unless she made it official. That wasn't Elena's failure. That was Cassandra's, and it ended now. She started the car. The dashboard glowed soft blue as the ignition hummed. Her hands, clenched on the wheel earlier, now moved with purpose. She drove back to her condo in the city, where a security guard opened the gate with a wave, and the lobby smelled like eucalyptus. But the quiet didn't calm her. She didn't sleep that night. At 6 a.m., she was back at her desk. No makeup, hair in a bun, coffee untouched. By 7 o'clock, the head of HR and the COO were sitting across from her, confused but alert. She pulled up a screen and began scrolling through Elena's employee file. No red flags, no late arrivals, no errors. Just a single line. Request to take home leftovers. She looked them in the eye and spoke plainly. This is where we start, but we don't stop there. We're not fixing one case. We're fixing the machine. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need it to. The room fell silent, because they could see she wasn't brainstorming. She was rebuilding. By 9 a.m., Cassandra had mobilized her leadership team. The usual morning chatter was gone. No slideshows, no performance metrics. Just a whiteboard with 2 words written at the top. Dignity first. She stood in front of the room. No blazer, no makeup, no title. Just urgency. Her voice was low but firm. We've built a brand on values, but we've failed to protect the people behind it. That ends today. The COO shifted. The head of legal raised an eyebrow. Cassandra didn't flinch. We don't need a task force. We need action. She listed the first reforms: leftover food distribution. Every midline location would box surplus meals at closing. Priority goes to kitchen and floor staff. No questions, no stigma. Emergency assistance. The new Dignity Fund would offer same-day grants for rent, transit, utilities, or childcare. No repayment. Confidential process. Wage restructuring. Every full-time employee earning below the local living wage would receive a raise immediately. Mental health support. A new partnership with a nonprofit mental health provider would bring trauma-informed counseling to staff, available during work hours with no loss of pay. Anonymous needs surveys. Every team member would be invited to complete a voluntary anonymous form, outlining what they needed but hadn't asked for. No delay, no pilot phase. By noon, Cassandra had looped in finance, operations, and logistics. By 2 p.m., every regional manager had received the first rollout instructions. By 5 o'clock, location number 42, Elena's store, was implementing the policy. But she didn't stop there. Cassandra knew that sustainable change couldn't come from one CEO's guilt. It had to come from culture. That meant building trust where silence used to live. According to Grok's model, trust among marginalized workers often requires not just open doors, but visible proof of follow-through. For people like Elena, who'd learned that asking could backfire, the reforms had to show up fast. So Cassandra made it personal. She visited store number 42 herself the next day. No cameras, no entourage, just her. Elena was prepping vegetables when Cassandra walked in. Her hair was tied up, her eyes tired, her back straight. The store manager introduced them, awkwardly. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and extended a cautious smile. Cassandra didn't lead with sympathy. She didn't bring up the trailer. She didn't need to. Instead, she handed Elena a sealed envelope. Inside was a raise, a real one. Enough to move her family into stable housing, enough to buy a full week's groceries without looking at coupons, enough to eat with her siblings without pretending she'd already eaten. Elena opened the letter quietly. Her hand trembled just slightly. Then she nodded and tucked it away. "Thank you," she said. "But the gratitude wasn't the point." Cassandra nodded back. "We should have done this sooner. Perplexity's audience data shows that this kind of moment, simple, unproduced, direct, is one of the most powerful emotional triggers in narrative storytelling. It's the proof, the payoff, the instant when justice starts to feel real. What makes it go viral isn't just compassion, it's clarity, the line between before and after. Back at headquarters, Cassandra recorded a video, not for the public, but for her employees. A 5-minute address. She didn't apologize, she took responsibility. "We've made mistakes, but now we're listening." She outlined the changes, explained the reasoning, invited anonymous feedback. Then she paused and said something unexpected. "If you've been struggling in silence, we see you. You are not invisible here." That sentence would later be repeated, shared, quoted in meeting rooms and TikTok clips and local news headlines. Gemini's workforce data from spring 2024 had shown something striking. In companies where leadership communicated directly and transparently about hardship, including wages, housing stress, and food insecurity, retention rates were 18% higher than industry norms. Productivity went up. So did morale. The public would eventually hear about the Dignity Fund. News outlets would pick up the story. Employees would share clips. Viewers would cry. Many would comment about the Sophias or Elenas they knew in their own lives. But the truth? The most important moment had already happened. Not on camera, not in a press release. It happened in a kitchen, with a raise, and a nod, and the first deep breath a woman had taken in months. And that was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Cassandra James didn't return to business as usual. She returned to something better. At midline kitchens, leftovers were no longer thrown away. They were packed and handed out with dignity. Wages were adjusted. Emergency aid became a permanent program. Mental health care wasn't just offered, it was embedded into the schedule. But even more than policy, the culture had shifted. Supervisors listened differently. Managers checked in with compassion, not quotas. And for the first time in years, employees like Elena walked through the door not just to survive, but to breathe. Still, Cassandra knew the work wasn't done. She had stepped in because she'd seen something with her own eyes. But not every leader would, and not every employee would have the chance to be noticed. That's where the system had to evolve. Grok's analysis reminded her, racial and economic injustice doesn't always show up loud. Often it hides in silence, in skipped meals, in unspoken stress, in the paperwork no one reads. Gemini's latest research showed that in 2024, nearly 12.8% of U.S. households remain food insecure. Many of those families include full-time workers, people like Elena, people who don't need charity, they need equity. And Cassandra's story proves something else too. Perplexity's audience insight was right. Transformation isn't just about guilt or heroism, it's about responsibility, about what happens when power meets empathy and empathy turns into action. Before all this, Cassandra thought leadership was about vision. Now she knows it's about sight, seeing people, really seeing them. So maybe the question isn't, how did this happen? Maybe the question is, who around you is hiding their struggle right now? The cashier who never takes a break, the janitor who walks home after closing, the assistant who always skips lunch. If you have the power to help, even just a little, what are you waiting for? Because real change doesn't start with a memo. It starts with noticing. It starts with care. And sometimes it starts with following someone home, not to watch, but to finally understand what we failed to see.